Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is a man famous for many things, from banning Floridians from reading books about gay people to banning Floridians from reading books about black people. But take a peek behind the curtain and you'll discover that Ron DeSantis isn't just a terrible person, he's also pretty terrible at running for president. And even his fellow Republicans are starting to take notice.
He was a juggernaut in Florida, and coming out of those midterm elections where the Republican Party didn't do as well as expected and Ron DeSantis consolidated Florida, the blue counties, the red counties, he just looked like a star of the Republican Party. I thought when he actually launched the campaign, there'd be more magic. It hasn't been there. Now there's more and more articles about how it's just lackluster and failure to launch.
That was especially true on July 16th, when the DeSantis campaign ended a terrible week with the news that old Ronnie was giving a dozen mid-level campaign staffers the boot.
Kate, the DeSantis campaign has axed roughly a dozen staffers in a cost-cutting move. The shakeup is a red flag for the campaign that remains Mr. Trump's chief rival for the GOP nomination, which has struggled to keep pace with him in polling and in fundraising, and appears to find it tough to raise enough money to keep his campaign afloat.
The DeSantis team called the move a cost-cutting measure, which is actually pretty concerning in itself, because up until now, Team Ron has made the financial strength of their campaign one of the main arguments for why DeSantis should be the nominee. Now, that doesn't seem to be the case. So what does all that mean? I'm glad you asked. For the second quarter, Ron DeSantis raised just $20 million, and only $17 million of that can actually be used in the primary. Compare that to Donald Trump's $35 million and Joe Biden's eye-popping $72 million. But it wasn't just the mass firings that landed DeSantis in the headlines. Just 2 days earlier, Ron lost two more staffers, the former head of his communications team, Dave Abrams, and fundraising guru, Tucker Obenshane. DeSantis has been running for president officially for less than 3 months, and he's already lost the brains behind his communications and fundraising operations. Now DeSantis is desperate, and he's looking for an expensive do-over.
Meanwhile, the Florida governor's team already is looking for a possible reset of its media strategy. A number of sources tell ABC News the DeSantis campaign has been weighing a shift in media strategy, while the governor has largely shunned mainstream media outlets and mainly stuck to friendly platforms like Fox News and conservative media outlets. That may be about to change.
As it turns out, when you're 20 points behind Donald Trump, you can't really afford to hide, which is exactly what Ron DeSantis has been doing. The governor hasn't taken a single interview with a mainstream media outlet, preferring the safety of his right-wing comfort bubble. What we're witnessing now is the slow dismantling of a campaign that many Republicans once thought was the best way back into the White House. Instead, they got this mess.
12, 14, 16, 18, yeah, thank you. Gotta have a little spike.
But it's worth asking how DeSantis got here, because his collapse has been nothing short of delicious. So that's exactly what we're going to do. And I've already got my Florida shirt for the occasion. Today, on this first episode of The Third Degree, we're taking a deep dive into the many, many, many troubles of a guy Republicans once considered their best Trump killer, and figuring out how it all went so wrong for old Meatball Ron. Yes, from weird campaign ads full of oiled-up shirtless muscle men to heated arguments with the mega-billionaires funding his whole campaign, Ron DeSantis is once again proving that what's cool in Florida is actually pretty cringy everywhere else. Oh yeah, hi, my name's Max Burns, and I'm a veteran Democratic strategist, political writer, and contributor for SiriusXM Progress, Rebel HQ, and a whole bunch of other places. You may have read me in the Daily Beast, the MSNBC Daily, CNN, or saw me getting banned from Fox News for dunking on Tucker Carlson so hard he cut our debate short. There was a report on Fox just the other day of a gigantic air-conditioned drug tunnel with a little mini subway in it. So you can't say that it's not like they haven't figured out how to get around a wall.
Yeah, so you just want to save money. You're just worried about federal expenditures. All right, we're out of time. Max, thank you.
And if you're really a sweetie, you've already subscribed to my Substack, The Third Degree, over at maxburns.substack.com. Hey, that's the name of this show. What do you know? All right, let's get weird. So, sure, there are high-profile staff departures and the campaign isn't hitting its already reduced fundraising goals. But none of this just happened out of the blue. Instead, what we're witnessing is the high cost of Ron DeSantis' history of absolute weirdness.
Yeah, well, thank
DeSantis took to the national stage draped in the cape of a Trump-slaying anti-woke action hero. But as it turns out, he's more like Jeb Bush than anyone expected.
Please clap.
Now, if you remember all the way back in 2004, progressive candidate Howard Dean was the insurgent it-boy of the Democratic primary. He was surging in the polls, and he seemed on pace to be a serious contender for the nomination. Then came that famous scream.
And we go to South Dakota and Oregon and Washington and Michigan, and then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House. Yeah!
Sigh. In politics, there are two really simple rules about political comms. One is to absolutely never get talked into wearing a novelty hat. The other is to never look like an unhinged lunatic in front of a bunch of voters. So you can imagine the political world's response when Ron DeSantis' big debut in front of voters involved this absolutely maniacal little display.
How much is that worth?
They won't even talk about that.
Crazy.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, don't back down.
We won't.
Now, come on, guys, I don't know what all the drama's about here. Ron's just genuinely excited to be here. Like, really, really excited. Like, maybe Florida shouldn't have stopped funding all that mental health care excited. Oh yeah, the third rule of political comms. It's really easy to make a mistake that makes you look unserious or downright weird. And once you've really stepped in it, it's almost impossible to convince voters that their first impression of you is wrong. Just ask Howard Dean, or Jeb Bush, or Mitt Romney, who spent the rest of the 2012 campaign trying to outrun his weird fixation on trees.
I was born and raised here. I love this state. It seems right here. The trees are the right height. I like seeing the lakes. I love the lakes. Just something very special here. The Great Lakes, but also all the little inland lakes that dot the parts of Michigan. I love cars.
But there are so many things besides just that laugh. Because ever since Ron announced his candidacy, people close to him have been rushing to the press to point out just how bizarre and downright rude the Florida governor actually is. Take former Republican Congressman David Trott. Trott and DeSantis were colleagues when DeSantis was a congressman from Florida. And no sooner had DeSantis launched his campaign than Trott went to Politico with a scathing review of their time together. Trott says, and again, these are his words, quote, "He never said a word to me. I was new to Congress and he didn't introduce himself or even say hello. I think he's an asshole. I don't think he cares about people." But oh, there's so much more. Because when you make enemies the way Ron DeSantis does, their memories tend to stay real sharp, and the calls are coming from inside the house. Literally. Take Florida Congressman Greg Steube, who really, really wants you to know that he does not like Ron DeSantis.
Why is this the week? I understand there's a strong case to be made for a Donald Trump presidency, but why did everybody in Florida go Trump this week? Yourself, Byron, and everybody made this the week.
Well, part of it was because the DeSantis team started, pinging people.
Oh.
Now, I've never had a conversation with any of them. I've never had a conversation with Governor DeSantis about, he's ever reached out to me. When I've tried to reach out to him to discuss issues, I don't get a response. And suddenly his team is suddenly reaching out. So
Steube tells Politico, quote, "There have been multiple opportunities where I've talked to him and given him my cell phone number and asked him to reach out to me. There have been events in my district where I was told to go stand in the corner and not allowed to participate." And while most campaigns go out of their way to showcase a huge list of endorsements at launch, the DeSantis campaign actually lost endorsements from former Republican allies because of just how badly Ron handled the rollout.
And freedom is worth fighting for.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis fending off critics and scrutiny after his presidential rollout on Twitter faced technical difficulties.
I was just kind of waiting for it to happen, that it did, and then we went on and got it done. But I think the fact that Elon and Twitter were involved, for conservatives, that's meaningful.
Oh yeah, and the guy apparently eats pudding with his fingers, which, listen, I'm not going to kink shame anyone, but how much do you need to be hated by your coworkers for stuff like that to make it to the national media? But Ron's weird behavior isn't to blame for all of his campaign's many missteps. There's actually a much simpler explanation. Ron DeSantis just thought the rest of America was a lot more like Florida than it actually is. Nowhere was Ron's miscalculation clearer than in Iowa, where the governor found out firsthand that most Iowans have never even been to Disney World, and they certainly don't care about DeSantis' fight to end wokeness in the Magic Kingdom.
Woke represents a war on truth, so we pledge to wage a war on woke. We will fight the woke in education. We will fight the woke in the corporations, and we will fight the woke in the halls of Congress. We will never, ever surrender to the woke mob. We are going to leave woke ideology in the dustbin of history where it belongs.
DeSantis committed early and completely to a campaign that put his fight against wokeness front and center, only to discover that voters care more about, policy issues than they do about Bud Light or Mickey Mouse. That critical mistake has a lot to do with the toxic ecosystem DeSantis has created in Florida. Listen, there's no denying that Ron DeSantis is the political king of Florida. His influence is unchallenged, and he spent years reshaping every aspect of life in the state. And that's exactly the problem. With DeSantis surrounded by bootlicks and no longer facing any serious challengers in Florida, he's free to throw red meat to his base all the time. All those book bans and school board fights, that's Ron DeSantis owning the libs for his Florida diehard fans. But most of those issues don't play nearly as well in states like Iowa and New Hampshire, where the share of MAGA extremists is much lower. It also doesn't help that DeSantis struggles to talk about local issues with local people, unless you want to hear more about Ron's endless war on woke.
Oh yeah, we just did a bill in Florida. We're not allowing the pronouns. Like, you can't force these kids to be choosing. They want like a second grader to pick a pronoun. How crazy is that?
With his campaign stuck in neutral and big donors hinting that they wanted a big shakeup, Ron DeSantis decided the 4th of July weekend was the perfect time to reboot his campaign. And boy, did he ever.
I will do everything in my power to protect our LGBTQ citizens.
If Caitlyn Jenner were to walk into Trump Tower and want to use the bathroom, you would be fine with her using any bathroom she chooses.
That is correct. In the future, can transgender women compete in Miss Universe?
Yes.
Make America great again.
Now, believe it or not, this ad was actually supposed to help Ron DeSantis. I mean, people actually paid money for this. Now, as you probably imagined, the reaction to this incredibly weird ad was immediate, and it was brutal. Republicans rushed to call the ad blatantly homophobic. Even former DeSantis supporters said the ad ended up making Donald Trump look better. And even DeSantis' allies couldn't bring themselves to defend the Meatball Man. In one Daily Beast op-ed, former DeSantis ally Yvonne Dean Bailey bluntly said, quote, "You couldn't pay me to vote for the Florida governor right now." Yikes. That nightmare of a July 4th ad left DeSantis putting out fires among his donors and his top staff. It also led to yet another drop for DeSantis in the polls, and the solidifying of the MAGA right behind Donald Trump. But in many ways, that ad perfectly encapsulates the DeSantis campaign. A big, loud, brazen publicity stunt with an unclear message and an unconvincing salesman. Ron DeSantis isn't asking GOP voters to clap for him just yet, but those days aren't far off. It's only taken DeSantis a few months to burn through millions of dollars of his donors' money. But it isn't clear what that money's actually buying, because with DeSantis now down nearly 2/3 from his polling highs earlier this year, it sure isn't buying a lot of goodwill from Republican voters. And that money may soon be gone, because the billionaires think DeSantis' campaign is turning into just another joke.
And I was around him a bit in the House of Representatives. Charmless is putting it nicely with this person, and it shows up when he's meeting with donors. It shows up when he's on. It shows up when he's out on the campaign trail. I mean, at some point, you have to make people feel something. And for whatever you think about Donald Trump, he makes you feel something.
The more voters are getting to know Ron DeSantis, the less they like the guy. And that's a real problem, because so far, DeSantis hasn't been able to successfully pivot to a Plan B, or a Plan C, or a Plan D. You get the picture. Ron DeSantis spent months building a presidential campaign designed to beat Donald Trump. Now DeSantis needs to clear a much bigger obstacle first: himself. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. Remember to leave a like and consider subscribing if you enjoyed the content. Your feedback is absolutely welcome, especially since this is my first effort entirely on my own. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Ron DeSantis down in the comments, as well as what you think I should cover next.